I'm going to show you this easy homemade banana cobbler recipe that I developed. And to start off, in a large bowl, we're going to add our dry ingredients. So here I have 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. After that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Next, I'm adding 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And now I'm going to add 1/2 cup of white granulated sugar. After that, I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of iodized salt. And now I'm going to add 1/2 cup of banana cake mix. Once all of those dry ingredients are added, you're just going to whisk them until they're well combined. And then once you finish whisking all the dry ingredients until they're combined, you're going to move on to the next step in the process. So now what I'm going to add to the bowl is 3/4 cups of whole milk. And then once that milk is added, we're going to move on to adding 6 tablespoons of melted unsalted butter. And now I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla bean paste. You can use vanilla extract as well. The bean paste just so happens to be what I had on hand. And I'm just whisking all the ingredients together until they're well combined. And then once all the wet and dry ingredients are well combined, you're going to move on to the next step in the process. So what I'm going to do now is just set this bowl aside and bring over my butcher chopping mat. And what I'm going to do now is cut up the bananas. So I'm using 5 ripe bananas for this. And when you're slicing the bananas, you want to ensure that they're 1/4 inches thick, because if they're too thin, then they'll end up becoming mushy once you put them in the oven. And they're supposed to at least maintain some firmness as you bake them in the oven. So once you finish slicing up those bananas, you're going to move on to the next step in the process. So I'm going to set this butcher mat aside with the bananas. And here I have cornstarch. I have about 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. And I'm going to add to this 1 tablespoon of cold water. And I'm just going to mix the cornstarch and water together until they're well combined and the cornstarch is fully dissolved, because what we're making here is a cornstarch slurry. And this is to help thicken the filling so it's not all loosey-goosey while it's in the oven. Some folks will just add the cornstarch by itself, but when you do that, you risk having a bunch of clumps in the filling, which we don't want that. So with that done, I have a separate large mixing bowl here, and to that I'm going to add the bananas that I sliced. And once we get all of those bananas in there, we're going to move on to making the filling. First, I'm adding 1/4 cup of brown sugar. You can use light or dark brown sugar. Next, I'm adding 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar. Here I'm adding my spices. I have ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, and ground ginger. And you can find the exact measurements for these spices linked in the description below. And next I'm adding 1 teaspoon of vanilla bean paste. And again, as mentioned, you can use vanilla extract if desired. It's up to you. And now I'm adding the cornstarch slurry that we made earlier. And all I'm doing now is just mixing the ingredients together until they're well combined with the bananas. And you're going to mix them together until they form this syrupy liquid that you see on the screen, as this will be our filling for the cobbler. And with that done, we're just going to move on to assembling our cobbler. So I'm going to set this bowl aside and bring over my 8x11 baking dish. You can use a 9x9 baking dish as well if desired. And to the dish, I'm going to add my first layer. So I'm using a slotted spoon. This is to ensure all of that syrupy liquid is able to drip down into the dish. And I'm just going to add those bananas to the dish until they all form one even layer, as you see on the screen. And once that's finished, we're going to move on to adding our batter. And just for awareness, you're going to allow the batter to rest for around 10 to 15 minutes while you're cutting up the bananas and making the filling. So the batter may stiffen up somewhat as it's resting. So you may have to give it a good stir in order to loosen it back up before you attempt to make this layer. And then once you get all of that batter into the dish, you're just going to spread it around until it forms an even layer, as you see on the screen. I'm using a plastic spatula to do that. So with that done, I'm going to place the cobbler in the oven. The oven is preheated 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to bake it for around 35 to 40 minutes. And then once it's done, you're just going to remove it from the oven and allow it to rest for 5 to 10 minutes before serving. So now that I'm done yapping, we finally reached the part I'm sure you all have been waiting for. We're going to cut into this and see what the inside looks like. And I'm just going to lift it up with that cooking spoon. And oh my goodness, look at how delicious that is. You can see how moist it is. You can see all of the syrup dripping off. And you notice those bananas, they held up relatively well considering. And I'm just going to place it onto the plate here. And you notice I didn't use walnuts and I didn't use pecans and I didn't use oatmeal. I used a True Blue flour-based topping for this. And you can serve it with ice cream and whipped cream if desired as well. And if you would like to see more of these recipes, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.